I'll start again here. Sorry for the interruption. Uh, Point of view matters in this short story. We have a third person, limited, omniscient narrator, and we see the story through the eyes of Martha Hale. That's advantageous for a couple of reasons. Oh, one major one is she is a peer. She is this jury of her peers. And so to the get to see Minnie through Mrs. Hale's thoughts. That's very important to us. It also helps us to see that we are also judging Mrs. Hale here. It is not just Minnie Foster who is on trial. Mrs. Hale is judging Mrs. Hale. Um, so this story is just as much about Mrs. Hale's own inner conflict and her own guilt at not being a companion to Minnie Foster, as it is a story about Minnie Foster's conflict. The internal conflict in here comes from Mrs. Hale, and she has to deal with the fact that for many years she has lived close to Minnie Foster and never done anything about it. And she should have. She knew how lonely that lifestyle was because she is a woman who would understand that. And so, because women know about the loneliness that can occur in certain life situations, because she would have known, she had a responsibility to do something. And she sees herself that she failed. You see it especially in what I would say is the climax on page 10. The picture of that girl, the fact that she had lived neighbor to that girl for 20 years and had let her die for lack of life, was suddenly more than she could bear. "Oh, I wish I'd come over once in a while," she cried. "That was a crime. That was a crime. Who's going to punish that?" "We mustn't take on," said Mrs. Peters with a frightened look toward the stairs. "I might have known she needed help. I tell you, it's queer, Mrs. Peters. We live close together and we live far apart. We all go through the same things. It's all just a different kind of the same thing. If it weren't, why do you and I understand?" Those are maybe the key words in this entire passage. We live close together and we live far apart. We go through the same things. It's all just a different kind of the same thing. Glaspell's target audience here isn't just men shouting at men, "Hey, listen. Hey, here are the things you don't understand." I mean, yes, that's part of it, but this is also a target audience for women saying, "You have guilt here too. If you let a woman rot on her own in the way that society has set up marriage, there is a responsibility there." So our short story is just as much putting Mrs. Hale on trial. And as her own juror, she finds herself guilty of letting Minnie Foster suffer in loneliness. Uh, Another quick note, the clear irony in this short story is that these wise men, these professional men whose job it is to investigate, they have no real clue where to look for actual evidence for an actual motive from a woman. They consider the kitchen a silly place. They consider where she's doing her sewing a silly place. They're supposed to know what they're doing. The irony is they do not look in the one place where in this society at this time, this is where you would know what a woman is or what she was doing, what her life circumstance was. The women get it. The women who are mocked for caring about these, what the men call trivial things. So that's clearly a piece of irony. Another thing that stood out to me is that the Minnie's name is repeated, and it is always her full name, and it is her full maiden name, Minnie Foster. Her last name is now right and has been right for 20 years. Mrs. Hale knows that, and yet she repeatedly refers to her as Minnie Foster. And obviously that is an emphasis on the fact that who she was died upon marriage. That is who she was before she was married. That is her true self. This marriage to Mr. Right, this cold man, this man who has strangled the life out of the bird, symbolically strangling the life out of Minnie Foster, he has taken her away. And so it is marriage that killed who she was. And when Mrs. Hale thinks about who she actually is, she thinks to 20 years ago, because that is the reality of the person. Those are just the thoughts of Jury of Her Peers. It's a commonly anthologized short story. I think this is actually my second time through it. I believe that I was assigned to read it in my undergraduate studies, and so don't be shocked to see Glaspell at another time, in another place, in another literature class.